Despite my relatively low expectations going in this Christmas-themed episode of my channel, I am pleased to report that Black Panther 2: Wakanda Forever is actually pretty darn good. Phase 4 has been a bit lackluster at times, and with how much the MCU has just been beating us over the head with content, everything to do with Chadwick Boseman's untimely death, and the fact that the first one just isn't all that good, well, I wasn't really expecting all that much going in. But within a few scenes, this movie managed to shift my tone quite a bit. Right from the start, they addressed what is happening to T'Challa, and I thought it was handled really well. His disease mirrored his real-life death in an interesting way, where both people were suffering in silence while putting on a brave and hard-working front. I think that's lovely as an ode to Chadwick, and it also fits the character of T'Challa quite well. We get the funeral and lots of slow, emotional grieving scenes. We really haven't had a Marvel movie opening that way aside from Endgame, and I think this movie does it quite nicely. I will say that the pure silence during the opening Marvel logo theme, where they showed only Chadwick Boseman, may have missed the mark just a bit. In my theater, the silence seemed super awkward, and it went on for a while. But I like the idea of it at least, so no big deal. Just a bit of a weird vibe to have so early on in a movie. But now that that's been handled, what I really liked was how this movie didn't constantly hammer away at the fact he was dead. We dealt with it and then we moved on. It had impact later on, and certain events and scenes are dictated by his death, of course, but largely this movie explores Wakanda as it is now, not necessarily as a strictly post-T'Challa one, which is a lot more compelling. We get to spend more time exploring Shuri and her mother this way, even Okoye and Namor. After that stuff, we get our introduction to the antagonists, the Talokans. This kind of stuff does bother me a bit, but honestly it shouldn't. The MCU is its own world now, not simply just an adaptation of pre-existing content. This name change, however subtle, does allow for future storylines from the comics to be tweaked more easily, since Talokan doesn't have a history or a certain relationship with other people or nations in the same way Atlantis does, even if it's pretty much a carbon copy. I like my comic book changes to be made to enhance the story, but at this point the MCU is big enough that as long as the reason for changing something isn't purely nonsensical, I'm pretty fine with it. And it does help that the introduction of the Talokans was tight as fuck. Almost as tight as the people who subscribe to my channel. If you want to be tight too, make sure to hit that little button, and I'll reward you with lots of future content, my undying love, and I'll tell this big handsome horse that he's a very good boy. You want him to know he's a very good boy, don't you? Well then make sure to subscribe. They made the water seem scary as shit here. Granted, that's not exactly the hardest thing to do. The ocean is scarier than those trolley candy commercials. Okay, well not quite, but still, that dark shot of their heads popping out of the water was gorgeous. Watching them scale the side of the ship, their pale blue skin and adornments, I loved it. The underwater scene was ominous and eldritch and set up that scene's tone perfectly. We haven't really had much water exploration in the MCU to date, and I loved how they went about showing us it here. It really gave off the feeling that this was the Talokans' home turf, and when Okoye was in the water in a later scene to save Shuri, I just remember thinking, you idiot, you have zero chance against them here. That's like fighting against Popeye in a lake of spinach. And a lot of that was conveyed largely by little things like the lighting and the score. This scene also initiated the plot of this movie, and it's a plot I like more than most. In fact, the concept of T'Challa doing what was, at the time, basically an objectively noble and honorable thing in exposing the world to Wakanda's resources, resulting in a genuine predicament for another nation, is brilliant. I love how gray that makes this world out to be, how no one decision can truly be purely good or bad. Namor is justified in feeling as though Wakanda owes him and his nation aid in this predicament, though I'm sure he could have handled requesting said aid in a bit better of a fashion than breaking into someone's home and threatening them. Which, by the way, his introduction scene? Maybe my favorite scene in the entire movie. It's not because he's super badass or cool. He's honestly not really that outwardly interesting in a world with purple, blue, green, and red people around every corner. But the scene in which he shows up is excellent. A slow and emotional scene between Shuri and her mother. A scene that verges on boring given the pacing so far, and this coming out of nowhere with zero foreshadowing was really cool. We were as shocked and intrigued as they were frightened and confused. And they gave him the cartoonish ankle wings. Hell yeah, Marvel, keep being weird. They don't even look that corny or anything either somehow. His design is quite good, and I'm a really big fan of this portrayal. With the death of T'Challa being handled so well and succinctly, and the Talokans being introduced in such a badass way, there was still one other early element to this movie that had me right on board. The humor, or lack thereof. Until the scene where they gather Riri, I honestly don't remember a single joke. Again, just like Endgame. Let the vibe be depressing and dolorous. Let us grieve and feel sad for longer than we want to. Push our emotions. Don't take the easy way out with tension-relieving gag jokes like the MCU has been so wont to do. Honestly, I'm as low on the MCU as of late as the next guy, but there are genuinely some signs here and there throughout Phase 4 that points towards this franchise learning from its mistakes and being better. I think that's exemplified really well in their handling of villains throughout this phase as well, a topic that I have extreme interest in making a video on in the near future. Please comment down below if you like the idea of that, or if you have any other good ideas for videos in the future. Where Riri is concerned, she was fine. She certainly became the more classic sassy Marvel side character, but she wasn't the worst of them all at least. I thought her character was a little all over the place at the beginning, kinda getting mad and annoyed or exciting and giddy arbitrarily with every cut of the camera, but she's a 19-year-old girl being overwhelmed by her heroes in the present situation. Whatever, I can buy some of it. I would have liked a bit more affection and heart in her goodbye at the end, but honestly the more I think about her, the less I think she actually mattered. She was a plot device, something for both sides to argue over and eventually fight for. But Riri herself really didn't matter. She wasn't an overly compelling character, she didn't hold a massive stake in the plot because of her choices or her personality. She had to be protected because the good guys had to be the ones to want to protect her, and she had to be killed because the bad guys had to want to kill her. She was just kinda there. I know she chose to create that vibranium-seeking device, but any character could have slotted into that spot in the story and then they would have become the Riri of this, is what I'm trying to say. T'Challa had massive impacts on the story because he chose to do something that directly resulted in a negative for a group of people. Anyone couldn't have done that because it was the fact that he did it that made it so monumental. Anyways, Namor was super solid, and massive props to this movie for not killing him off at the end. If they killed off another massively interesting villain so soon after doing it with the Thor, I would have lost my mind, but more grey and cunning Namor in the future. Bliss.
My people call me Khan, but my enemies call me Namor.
I thought he was a pretty cool character, an amalgamation of many of his comic book counterparts. You really couldn't nail him down as a purely good or bad guy, farthering a bit of that grey theme from earlier. He wanted to protect his people. Good guy. He wanted to kill a girl you could easily argue was perfectly innocent. Bad guy. Wanted to join the Wakandans and protect their resources and traditions together. Good guy. Wanted to obliterate the entire surface world out of fear of them attacking him first. Bad guy. And each of those also had additional nuances that made him swing one way or the other. But I liked how he was still easily able to have special and impactful moments with a wide array of characters on account of his general vibe and personality. He was also beaten by being outsmarted, and when he yielded, he actually honored that yield and respected Shuri for how she handled the situation. Good growth for her, good character work for him, and it made the feud between these two nations gain another layer to be built upon in the future. His more prominent cronies could have had more personality than just big boy, little girl, but honestly giving them more time and effort would have only made this movie longer, and by George, we didn't need that. At well over 2.5 hours, this movie isn't exactly a slog, and it isn't paced poorly. I think they could have benefited from cutting 10 to 15 minutes, but you could say that about most films these days, and at least there aren't a gaggle of areas in which I think they certainly should have trimmed stuff down. Well, except with this guy. Why the hell are you here? Martin Freeman, bless your British heart, you brought nothing of value to this movie. Hey, neither did you. Don't smirk at me. This just felt like weird fan service to me. Even if he affected the plot in meaningful ways, his contributions could have been gleaned elsewhere. I just thought all of his scenes were huge departures from the main plot, and not in a good way. I didn't really care for him in the first, and I don't really care for him here either. Just go do Sherlock 5, for God's sake, stop appearing in shit like this. Benedict just did Doctor Strange 2, this is good timing, go now before the Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. So maybe I've changed my tune. Cut out his shit and maybe trim some fat from a handful of scenes that wore out their welcome, and this movie would have felt a lot snappier and probably kept us engaged more consistently. On the other hand, my least favorite act from this movie was certainly the third because I felt like a lot of it was weirdly rushed, namely in Shuri becoming the Black Panther. Her actually taking on the mantle was something I expected and wanted. How it happened, however, didn't really work for me. It felt extremely hasty and, well, might as well become a superhero, I guess. She literally has zero combat experience, and now after taking a herb and having a vision quest, she's able to take on someone arguably as strong as the Hulk. Okoye struggled mightily with Namor's generals. The Talokans are super legit. Shuri shouldn't become seemingly on par with her brother after being the Black Panther for like 19 minutes. But it's less that suspension of disbelief and more just how hurriedly she goes from the Black Panther is gone forever to, yeah, okay, I'll do it. They didn't build up her taking on the mantle well at all, and it made her eventual transformation very unsatisfying. As well as the fact that they kept harkening back to her barely contained rage when we really don't see an ounce of that side of her at any point. Killmonger says they're not so different, and Namor even tries to take advantage of her in this way, and I really don't think they showed us that this was a viable strat whatsoever. That whole element just kinda rang more and more hollow with every mention. To go back to her fight against Namor though, she did weaken him, and that was smart and clever, and a good way to level the playing field between two characters who realistically aren't even remotely on the same power level. And worth noting is that in the comics she is shown to be a very proficient fighter, mostly after already becoming the Black Panther, but that's never remotely shown to us here, and as I said, the MCU is basically becoming its own thing at this point, so they can't expect us to buy her becoming a sick fighter just because there's precedence from the comics. I'm not saying the end result should have changed. It's a bit like that Rey-Kylo fight from episode 7, where people were livid that Rey could beat Kylo with her entire lack of experience, yet Kylo was severely injured from a Wookiee bowcaster blast. Now, that movie did not do a good job of expressing to us how handicapped Kylo was, and in this movie, I just think it all happened way too fast and way too easily. She lured him in, she weakened him, she beat him, he yielded, bang bang, we're all done here, let's go home, when's Black Panther 3? What I would have really liked to see, not to do too much rewriting, would be a small montage scene between her and Okoye after taking the Black Panther drugs. The drugs could enhance her mind and spirit, allowing her training to be hyper streamlined so she could make weeks of progress in only a day or two. It could also express to us how she had some of these latent powers already, allowing her to take on the mantle so easily. Plus, it could act as a small redemption for Okoye after being stripped of her titles following Shuri's capture. Superhero movies today are sorely lacking the good old-fashioned montage scenes of the past. This could have been a really fun and effective scene that I think would have fit really nicely and made the story feel a bit sharper. Anyways, all in all, quite a good movie. More emotional than most, a solid plot with an enjoyable antagonist who we're gonna get more of in the future. I like Shuri quite a bit, and there's a lot more story to tell with her, and I don't outright hate the idea of more Riri, so that's good. Cutting some fluff and trimming down some first half scenes and then maybe chilling out a bit towards the end could have helped the pacing of this thing quite a bit, but for a script that was fully written with Chadwick Boseman in the starring role to be reworked this darn smoothly is pretty impressive. Maybe not the most rewatchable movie in the franchise, but a welcome addition that I think outclasses the first one in more ways than one. I'd imagine both Wakanda and Namor will have plenty of prominence in the MCU going forward, which is something I'm more okay with now than ever. Make sure to leave a like down below if you enjoyed this video, or give it a dislike if you hated it. Keep me honest. A comment goes a long way, and I love being able to interact with the people who so kindly take the time out of their busy days to support my channel. I really do appreciate it a lot. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.